Liana Avery's sneakers squeaked against the hospital floor as she turned the corner too fast, nearly crashing into a cart of sterile supplies. "Sorry," she called over her shoulder, gripping the clipboard tighter against her chest as she rushed past the nurse's station. Another day, another shift she didn't expect to be working. She was only supposed to be a temp just a few weeks to help during the staff shortages at St. Vincent's Hospital. But somehow, 2 weeks had turned into 4, and now she was juggling overnight shifts and last-minute call-ins like she'd been on the team for years. "Liana." Nurse Carla waved her over. "Room 315. VIP guest just arrived. You're up." "VIP?" Liana blinked. "Like a donor." Carla grinned. "Something like that. They didn't say much, but he's visiting a patient. You're just checking vitals for the woman in the bed. Don't get distracted by the suits." Liana rolled her eyes. "Please. I'm too tired to be impressed." But when she opened the door to room 315, her breath caught mid-step. Standing by the window was a man in a slate gray suit that looked like it cost more than her entire student loan debt. His presence filled the room, tall, broad-shouldered, and completely out of place among the beeping monitors and antiseptic air. His gaze flicked to her. Deep green eyes, sharp jawline, controlled, unreadable expression. "Hi," Liana said, pushing past the jolt in her chest. "I'm Nurse Liana. Just here to check Mrs. Ashton's vitals." The older woman in the bed smiled kindly. "This is my grandson, Lucas. He's just fussing over me." "I'm not fussing," Lucas said, voice low and calm. "I told you I'd make time to visit." Liana focused on her work, but she could feel his eyes on her. Watching. Assessing. When she finished, she gave Mrs. Ashton a warm smile. "Everything looks good. Let me know if you need anything." She turned to leave. Lucas was still standing there, still watching. Then, just as she reached the door, his voice stopped her. "You're new." It wasn't a question. She looked back. "Just temping." He nodded slowly, then added, "You're good with her." "She's sweet," Liana said with a shrug. "And cooperative. That helps. I've seen nurses rush in and out like robots. You didn't." Liana blinked, unsure what to say to that. "Well, I try to treat people like people." Lucas held her gaze for a second longer. Then he said, "Thank you," and returned to his grandmother's side. Liana left the room without another word, but her heart was thudding louder than it should have. The next day, Lucas was back. Same room. Different suit. Liana nearly turned around when she saw him through the window. But Mrs. Ashton waved cheerfully. "Liana, come in, dear." Lucas looked up from his phone, then stood, buttoning his jacket. "Good to see you again." "You too," Liana said, trying to sound normal as she moved to the bedside. "I didn't expect you'd still be here. I rearranged my schedule," he said simply. She glanced at him. "You must have a flexible job." "I run my own company." He said it like it was nothing. No bragging. Just matter of fact. "Oh, that's cool." She gave an awkward little nod. "Tech? Finance? Real estate?" "Of course it is," she thought. "With that suit? That watch? That voice?" He was probably one of those guys who had 5 meetings before breakfast and closed $10 million deals before lunch. Still, something about him didn't match the usual cocky, self-important type. He helped his grandmother adjust her blanket, sat through her stories about the neighbor's cat, and didn't even glance at his phone during it all. And when Liana made her usual rounds, he always made a point to greet her. For days later, he was still there. She tried not to notice how he always seemed to arrive during her shift, or how he started asking questions not just about his grandmother, but about her. "Where are you from? Why nursing? You always work nights?" And then, one evening, after she finished checking vitals, Mrs. Ashton said sweetly, "Lucas, why don't you walk Liana out?" Liana opened her mouth to protest, but he was already standing. Outside the patient wing, they walked side by side toward the elevators. "Do you ever get used to these halls?" he asked. Liana smiled. "You stop noticing the beeping after a while. The lighting, though, never gets better." He chuckled softly. It was the first time she'd seen his features relax. They stopped at the elevator. "I'm having dinner at the Langston rooftop tomorrow night," he said suddenly. "Join me." She stared. "What? Dinner? You and me?" No scrubs. No hospital lighting. She blinked. You're serious. I don't ask things I don't mean. Liana hesitated. I don't. This is weird, right? You're visiting family. I'm the nurse. He tilted his head. You're not her nurse. You're a temp. And I'm just a guy asking a woman to dinner. The elevator dinged. She looked at him. Something about his offer wasn't pushy, wasn't arrogant, just honest. Okay, she said, stepping inside. But only if you promise not to talk about real estate. His lips curved into a smile that made her stomach flutter. Deal. The doors closed. The next night, when she walked into the Langston Hotel's rooftop restaurant, Liana felt like she'd stepped into a scene from a different life. Golden lights strung overhead. Waiters in black suits. A city skyline that stretched forever. And then there was Lucas, waiting by a corner table with a view that made her breath catch. He stood when he saw her. Wow, he said, eyes trailing over her navy dress. You clean up dangerously well. She grinned. You're not so bad yourself. Dinner was absurd. Lobster, truffle pasta, champagne she couldn't pronounce. He didn't brag. He didn't name drop. He just told her about growing up with his grandmother, starting his company at 24, the stress, the wins, the failures. And in return, she told him about her mother's illness, why she chose nursing, how it made her feel like she wasn't helpless anymore. He listened, really listened. By dessert, something had shifted. He reached for her hand across the table. I don't usually do this. Dinner? She teased. He shook his head, serious now. Feel like this. So fast. Liana's heart thudded. Yeah, me neither. He leaned in. I want to see you again. She nodded. Okay. Then his lips brushed her soft, slow, like he was checking if she'd pull away. She didn't. And in that moment, under the stars and city lights, Liana realized something scary and thrilling at the same time. She was already falling. The rain started just as she stepped out of the hospital entrance, soaking into her thin cardigan before she'd even reached the street. Liana pulled the hood of her jacket over her head and muttered a curse under her breath. Her umbrella was still in her locker. She didn't feel like going back inside. Not after what just happened upstairs. Lucas had been waiting outside his grandmother's room again. But this time he hadn't said much. Just watched her quietly as she checked the monitors, barely speaking until she'd finished. You okay? She'd asked him softly when Mrs. Ashton dozed off. He'd nodded but didn't elaborate. Now, as she shivered at the curb, a sleek black car pulled up in front of her. The passenger window rolled down. Get in. She leaned down. Lucas was in the back seat, his jacket folded neatly beside him, tie loosened. You don't have to, you're soaked, he interrupted. Let me drive you home. She hesitated, then opened the door. The interior was warm and smelled faintly of leather and something expensive she couldn't name. She sank into the seat, unsure what to do with her dripping sleeves. Lucas passed her a black cashmere scarf from the seat beside him. You'll catch something like that, he said, nodding at her soaked collar. Thanks, she said, wrapping it around her neck. The car pulled away from the curb. Rain streaked across the windows, blurring the city lights outside. She glanced at him. You seemed off tonight. Lucas looked at her, then back at the window. My grandmother's being moved to a private care facility. It's time. Is she okay with that? She says yes, but she doesn't mean it. Liana looked down at her lap. That's hard. She raised me, he said, voice low. She gave up everything for me. Now I have to convince her that this is the right thing while I feel like I'm abandoning her. You're not abandoning her. Lucas met her eyes. You'd tell me if I was, wouldn't you? I would, she said. But I'm not going to lie just to make you feel better. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, but he didn't say anything. She gave him her address and the driver turned toward the river. The car was silent for a while, but not uncomfortably so. Then he asked, do you ever think about leaving it? Nursing? He nodded. All the time, she admitted. But I never do. Why not? Because the second I think I'm done, someone looks at me like I'm the only person in the room who sees them. And I remember why I started. Lucas studied her. That's rare. She laughed lightly. What is? Knowing who you are. The car slowed to a stop in front of her apartment building. A cracked lamp above the entrance flickered in the rain. She reached for the door handle. Liana. She turned. I want to see you again, he said. Away from all of this. Her fingers tightened around the scarf he'd given her. Okay. I'm leaving for London Tuesday, just for a few days. Come with me. She stared at him. You're serious. I have a meeting there, but I'll be free most of the time. We can go to the tower, the markets, wherever you want. No hospitals. No monitors. Just you and me. You don't even know me. I know enough to want more. The rain pelted harder against the windshield. If I say yes, she said slowly, and I get on that plane, what happens after London? Lucas leaned forward. Then we see where it goes. Together. She opened the door, stepping into the downpour before looking back. I'll think about it. He nodded once. Good. The door shut and the car pulled away. Upstairs in her tiny apartment, Liana stood by the window watching the street below. The scarf still clutched in her hand. She didn't sleep much that night. By morning, her decision was made. 2 days later, she stood at the private terminal of the airport, suitcase in hand, heart pounding as Lucas stepped out of the waiting lounge. You came, he said. I still think this is crazy. He took her suitcase, brushing his fingers against hers. Sometimes crazy's the only thing worth doing. The jet was waiting behind him, engines humming softly in the distance. A flight attendant opened the door. Liana hesitated just long enough to see the curve of a smile touch Lucas's lips again. This time, she stepped forward without looking back. The hotel suite was silent except for the faint ticking of an antique clock on the mantel. Liana stood barefoot on the balcony, wrapped in one of the plush robes from the wardrobe, her hair still damp from the shower. The city of London stretched out beneath her, lights glittering like scattered diamonds across the twilight. A breeze lifted the hem of her robe and she hugged it tighter around her. Behind her, Lucas stepped out, holding 2 porcelain cups of something warm. He handed her one, and she took it with a grateful nod, the steam curling up between them. You didn't say much during dinner, he said, leaning against the stone railing beside her. I was still trying to figure out if that was a real restaurant or a movie set, she replied, sipping the tea. The food was decent. The chandelier was the size of my apartment. Lucas smiled faintly but didn't look at her. You've been quiet since we landed. Liana stared down at the street, where red double-deckers glided past like toy buses. It's just surreal. All of it. He didn't push her. She turned toward him. What made you ask me to come? He took a breath, then said, I've never been good at waiting. When I want something, I go after it. She studied him. And you wanted me? I still do. The air between them tightened, not with tension, but something deeper. Unspoken. Fragile. She crossed her arms. You don't know everything about me. I don't need to. Not all at once. I have student debt the size of a mortgage. I don't own anything more expensive than my phone. And I haven't taken a vacation in years. Lucas nodded. And I've made deals that lost millions, held press conferences while knowing everything was falling apart behind the scenes, and I still see my father's disappointment every time I look in the mirror. Your point. She blinked. You're not what I expected. I hope not. They stood in silence for a while. Then she asked, what are we doing? He looked at her. We're seeing what happens. I'm not built for casual, she said quietly. I don't do halfway. I don't either. She searched his face. Then what does this mean? Lucas didn't hesitate. It means I'm not letting you walk away from this without knowing what it could be. The way he said it made something lodge in her throat. Later that night, she couldn't sleep. She slipped out of bed, careful not to wake him, and wandered into the sitting room. The city outside was still alive even at this hour. She pulled her knees to her chest on the velvet sofa and stared out the window. She hadn't planned to feel this much. Not this fast. But something about Lucas made everything louder. Clearer. He looked at her like she mattered, not just in passing but in permanence. A soft rustle behind her. You always do this? He asked, voice rough with sleep. She didn't look at him. Only when I don't know what happens next. He moved to stand behind her, resting his hands on the back of the couch. I don't have answers for everything. But I know I want you with me. She turned. We live in two different worlds. Then I'll build a new one. She stared at him, her defenses crumbling under the weight of those words. Lucas reached into the pocket of his lounge pants and pulled out a small, square envelope. What's that? He handed it to her. Inside was a handwritten invitation. Black ink on thick cream paper. A gala. In Manhattan. 5 nights from now. I'm hosting it, he said. It's for the hospital foundation. My name's on the board. Her jaw tightened. You didn't mention that. I wasn't ready to. She set the invitation on the table. So that's how you knew which hospital I was at? Yes. You knew before we met. I was there to see my grandmother. But when I saw you, I stayed longer than I meant to. Liana stood. Did you plan any of this? No, then why not tell me sooner? Lucas stepped forward. Because I didn't want you to think this was a game. Or a setup. She looked at him, heart pounding. And now I want you to come to that gala. Not as a guest. As the woman I'm with. She didn't reply. I'm not asking you to decide anything tonight, he said. But I'm not hiding who I am anymore. She walked past him, back toward the bedroom. At the door, she paused. If I go, it's not to play dress up. I won't pretend to be someone I'm not. Lucas's voice was steady. That's exactly why I want you there. The next morning, she stood in front of the mirror, holding the invitation in one hand and her phone in the other. Her heart was still cracked wide open, but something else had taken root overnight. A quiet certainty. She didn't know what would happen next, but she wasn't going to pretend she didn't care. Not anymore. The ballroom shimmered like something out of a dream, crystal chandeliers casting soft gold light over the crowd, polished marble floors reflecting gowns and tuxedos, and a string quartet playing something elegant near the stage. But Liana barely noticed any of it. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her champagne glass as she stood just inside the entrance, scanning the room. She hadn't seen Lucas since they landed back in New York. He'd sent a car, a dress box, and a note asking her to meet him here. No instructions, no promises, just 5 words written in his unmistakable handwriting. I'll be waiting for you. She stepped further inside, the heels he'd chosen making her walk taller than usual. Her hair was pinned up, her dress a deep shade of midnight that hugged her curves without revealing too much. She didn't need to check the room again to know eyes were already turning. But she wasn't here to impress strangers. She was here for him. A waiter passed by with a tray of champagne flutes. She took a second one before continuing toward the far end of the room where donors and hospital executives were clumped in tight circles of polished laughter and practiced smiles. Then she saw him. Lucas stood near the stage, surrounded by men in tailored suits and women in couture gowns, but he was the only one not pretending to be charmed by the company. His gaze lifted the moment she entered his line of sight, and the crowd around him might as well have disappeared. She walked toward him slowly, her heartbeat steady, her decision already made. He met her halfway, stopping just short of touching her. You came, he said, voice low. I said I would. Lucas studied her, and she could tell he was taking in more than just the dress. His expression shifted something reverent, something unguarded. You look like you belong here, he said. I don't, she replied, but I'm not leaving. He let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh, and held out his hand. Dance with me. She set her glass on a nearby tray and took his hand without hesitation. The music changed. Slower now, warmer. He guided her to the center of the floor, his touch confident but careful, like he knew she could still walk away if she wanted to. You've been quiet since London, he said as he turned her gently. I've been thinking. About. She looked up at him. Whether stepping into your world means losing mine. Lucas didn't answer immediately. The music swelled around them. I won't ask you to change, he said, but I will ask you to let me in. I'm not afraid of you, she said. I'm afraid of what happens when this stops feeling like a dream. Then let's make it real. She met his gaze. That easy? Lucas leaned closer. Nothing about you has been easy, but I've never wanted easy. They danced for a few more beats in silence. Then Liana said, I need to know something. Ask me anything. If I walk into the hospital tomorrow and tell people I'm seeing the man who funds half the foundation, am I going to be a headline or a liability? His jaw tightened. Neither. I'll make sure of it. I don't need protecting. I know, he said. But you deserve respect. And I'll make damn sure you get it. The music faded. They stopped moving, but neither of them let go. A man in a navy tuxedo approached, clearing his throat softly. Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Ashford. They're ready for you. Lucas gave Liana a look, something that said this wouldn't take long, then turned to follow. She stepped back as he took the stage, watching him ascend the stairs with the kind of quiet command that didn't need to be taught. He adjusted the microphone once, then looked out over the crowd. My name is Lucas Ashford, he began. And I'm here tonight not as a businessman, not as a donor, but as a grandson. He told the story of his grandmother's treatment, how the carrot St. Vincent's extended beyond medicine, how it had reminded him that healing required more than science, it required kindness. He didn't mention names, but when his eyes found Liana's across the ballroom, she knew exactly who he meant. I've built skyscrapers, he continued, but none of them matter if we forget the people inside them. So tonight, I'm pledging an additional $10 million to expand the hospital's community outreach program, so more patients like my grandmother receive the dignity they deserve. Applause erupted. Liana didn't clap. She couldn't move. $10 million. She hadn't known the scale of his wealth. She'd seen glimpses, private jet, rooftop restaurants, but this was different. This was purpose. He descended the stage to a flurry of congratulations, hands reaching to shake his, people leaning in to whisper approval. But his eyes never left her. He crossed the ballroom without hesitation, stopping just in front of her. I meant every word, he said, especially the part about kindness. She stepped closer, voice steady. You didn't have to say it like that. I did, he said. Because I've never said it to anyone before. They stood inches apart, the noise of the room blurring behind them. I'm not going back to the hospital, she said softly. His brows lifted. You're quitting. No, I'm transferring. To where? Wherever they need me most. Lucas's voice dropped. You're leaving the city? Not yet. But I won't stay in a place that asks me to be less than I am. I don't want you to. She tilted her head. Then what do you want? He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a ring. No box. No speech. Just a simple band with a single diamond held between two fingers like it meant everything. I want you to build something with me. Not a company. Not a building. A life. She froze. Lucas, I know it's fast. I know it's insane. But I also know I've never been more certain of anything. Her breath caught. I'm not asking you to say yes tonight, he said quickly. I just needed you to know I'm not going anywhere. Liana stared at the ring, then at him. You realize if I say yes, I'm not going to let you get away with half answers and boardroom charm. I wouldn't expect anything less. She reached out and took the ring from his hand, not to put it on, just to feel the weight of it. Then she said, I'll give you my answer tomorrow. He nodded, not disappointed, just waiting. The next morning, she stood in his penthouse kitchen barefoot, her hair tangled from sleep, holding a mug of coffee he'd made exactly how she liked it. Lucas walked in, still drying his hair with a towel. You're quiet again, he said. She set her mug down and held out her hand. He looked down. The ring sat on her palm. Put it on me, she said. Lucas stared at her for a second, then took the ring and slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. I guess that's a yes, he said. She smiled. It's a promise. He stepped closer. To what? To everything we haven't figured out yet. As long as we figure it out together. Lucas pulled her into his arms. That I can do. And as the morning sun poured across the floor, warming the tiles beneath their feet, she leaned into him and whispered, I walked into that hospital thinking it was just another temp job. He kissed the top of her head. And now? She looked up at him, eyes shining. Now I know it was the beginning of the rest of my life. Liana twisted the gold band on her finger as she stepped into the community clinic's new wing, the scent of fresh paint still clinging to the air. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting long, warm stripes across the polished floors. The mural on the far wall, a vibrant collage of city life, children playing, nurses tending to patients, people holding hands, had been completed only yesterday. She paused to take it in before heading deeper inside. Ms. Avery, the director, called softly from the hallway, your patient from the outreach program is ready in exam 2. Liana gave a nod and moved with practiced ease. The past few weeks had been a blur of transition, leaving the hospital, beginning work with the mobile outreach unit, and helping launch the new Health Equity Center funded in part by Lucas's foundation but built on her vision. And through it all, Lucas had never missed a step. He walked into meetings when she asked, stayed silent when she needed space, and when they were alone, he asked the kind of questions that made her feel like every part of her life mattered. She finished her rounds just before noon and found him waiting in the lobby. He wasn't in a suit. Instead, he wore jeans, a navy sweater, and a relaxed kind of ease she'd only seen in rare moments. He held a paper bag in one hand. You brought lunch. I was instructed not to show up empty-handed. She arched a brow. By who? Your assistant. Apparently she outranks me now. Sounds about right. They walked out to the clinic garden. A modest strip of green with 2 benches and a few stubborn marigolds still pushing through the soil. He handed her the bag and sat beside her. I was thinking, Lucas said, watching her pull out a container of pasta and garlic knots, we should go back to London. Her fingers paused around the fork. Why? Not for business. Just for us. A week. No events. No speaking engagements. Just long walks and bad coffee. She leaned back. Tempting. I'm serious. You always are. Lucas turned to face her. I don't know how I went this long not knowing what it felt like to be understood. But now that I have it, I'm never giving it up. Liana didn't reply. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a folded envelope. What's this? Read it. He opened it and scanned the contents. Then looked up. You're accepting the board seat? I am. But under one condition. He waited. I want full autonomy over the health equity grants. No interference, no red tape. Lucas didn't hesitate. Done. She tilted her head. You didn't even ask what I plan to do with the money. I don't need to. You've already changed more with half a budget than most people do with millions. Liana set her food aside and turned to him. You know, I never imagined any of this. When we met, I thought you were just another visitor. A good-looking one, sure, but one who'd disappear as soon as the patient left. Lucas smoothed his hand over hers. And I thought you were just another overworked nurse who'd never give me the time of day. She laughed. We were both wrong. Thank God. The next few weeks passed in a rhythm that felt impossibly natural. Mornings started with shared coffee in their apartment overlooking the park. Afternoons were filled with clinic visits, meetings, and community events. Evenings often ended with late dinners, Lucas leaning against the kitchen counter while she recapped her day, his attention never wavering. One night, as she curled up beside him on the couch, he brushed her hair behind her ear and said, We still haven't talked about the wedding. She exhaled, smiling. Do we need to talk about it? I like things as they are. I do too. But I also want to marry you. She looked up. Why now? Because every time I leave a room with you in it, I want to get back to you faster. Because when I see your shoes by the door, I breathe easier. And because I want the rest of the world to know what I already do, that you're mine and I'm yours. Liana leaned in and kissed him, slow and sure. Then let's do it. They didn't plan a spectacle. No headlines. No 500 guests. Instead, they stood beneath a canopy of white orchids in the garden behind Mrs. Ashton's country home, surrounded only by a handful of friends and family. Mrs. Ashton, wrapped in a pale blue shawl, sat front row, tears in her eyes as she watched her grandson finally let someone all the way in. Liana wore a simple ivory dress with cap sleeves and a silk ribbon at her waist. Lucas wore a gray suit without a tie. They held hands and exchanged vows. They wrote that morning, words filled with promises that had already begun long before rings were involved. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Lucas didn't wait. He pulled her close and kissed her like they had all the time in the world. Because now they did. Later, as dusk settled over the garden and laughter drifted toward the stars, Lucas found her alone beneath the tree where they'd first taken their wedding photos. He stepped behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and rested his chin on her shoulder. "Do you ever think about how fast it all happened?" she asked. "Every day. And it doesn't scare you?" "It used to. Until I realized the best things don't wait." She turned in his arms and looked up at him. "What now?" He cupped her face in his hands. "Now we build. A life. A home. Maybe a family." Her eyes softened. "That sounds perfect. It will be. Because it's ours." And as the night deepened and the stars blinked into view, they stood together beneath the branches, two hearts that had collided in the most unexpected way and chosen, again and again, to stay. Years later, their home would be filled with laughter, with muddy shoes by the door and crayon drawings on the fridge. The clinic would grow, expanding into underserved neighborhoods across the state. Lucas would still occasionally sneak into her early morning meetings just to bring her tea and kiss her cheek before slipping out again. And every anniversary, without fail, they would return to London. Not for the city, not for the view, but for the memory of the moment everything changed. Because they never needed a second chance. They only needed one undeniable, unforgettable beginning. And they built the rest together.